Borag Thung, Earthlets, and welcome to the 2000 AD thrillcast. And on this episode, we are celebrating Steve Dillon, one of the much missed artists from 2000 AD who passed away a few years ago. And the reason why we're talking about him is because of this beauty, the Steve Dillon Apex edition featuring his art from his incredible time at 2000 AD. So we're going to be talking to someone who knew him and someone who admires his work as we dive into the genius that is Steve Dillon. Well, welcome back, Earthlets. As I said, we're going to be talking about Steve Dillon on this episode because the Apex edition of his 2000 AD work is out now. I apologize before we get going for my slightly rough voice. I've returned from San Diego Comic-Con with a dose of the old vid. So I kind of struggling through as I try to overcome this particular malady. But on this episode, we are going to be talking to, and we're very lucky to talk to Tanya, who is Steve Dillon's daughter-in-law and the organizer of the Steve Dillon Art Exhibition, which for those of you who've attended the Enniskillen Comics Show in Northern Ireland will have seen this, and it's been to a couple of other places, and it's original artwork by the master. So an absolute fantastic tribute to Steve and not just his 2000 AD work, but also his work for DC Comics, things like Preacher and Marvel and beyond. I'm going to pick this up again because the 2000 AD Apex is the oversized artist edition that covers everything from his very earliest work on 2000 AD. Let me just grab here. So the greatest story ever told from the 1980 sci-fi special. Now, bear in mind when Steve started work, he was a teenager. And for those of you who are watching, I can't really see on YouTube. Those of you who are watching on YouTube are watching me make a right hash of this. But it's just, I mean, it's so recognizably Steve's work. And it only improves from there on in. You've got pages from Blockmania in here, Trapper Hag, Cry the Werewolf, which we'll be talking about in a moment. Rogue Trooper, his Judge Dredd Emerald Isle story, which is still one of my favorites. The Wreckers, and also the story that he did with Alan Moore, which was ABC Warriors Red Planet Blues, colored by John Higgins, which is, if you've not seen it before, I mean, it's a great story in of itself, but also to see these original pages is something else. So yeah, absolutely fantastic collection. There's even his Rogue Trooper from the Rogue Trooper annual in 1991. So yes, it was a real privilege to be able to talk to Tanya, not just about Steve the artist, but Steve the man, and what a fantastic guy he was. Always so warm and generous with his time. So that was fantastic. In the second half of this episode, my colleague Steve is talking to critic and editor and writer David Brothers, who has long been a friend of the Thrillcast, and they're talking about Cry the Werewolf, which is one of those absolute bolt-on Judge Dredd classics where you've got a genre mashup between sci-fi and kind of, you know, horror tropes and everything. So a real classic of not just Steve's work for 2000 AD, but also for Judge Dredd. So very much looking forward to listening to that. But in the meantime, we're going to go over to our chat with Tanya, who is going to talk about the thinking behind the Steve Dillon Art Exhibition, and also what it was like to know Steve when he was still with us. So, Tanya, thank you so much for talking to me on the podcast. Not just obviously we're doing it because the Steve Dillon Apex edition is out this month, but to talk about Steve, because this is I get I guess we must share the for different reasons the same kind of bittersweet feeling about this book.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Steve?
Yeah, so obviously I'm married to his middle son, Mark, and I knew Steve probably for around 13 years before he was taken. I say he was taken because it just felt like he was taken too soon, doesn't it? It felt like we were kind of robbed of him, which is, the sad part of it all, I think. Um, and then obviously the kind of the artwork just kind of sat in the house for a little while. We didn't do much with it. And then I think it was just a nice way, the way it kind of came about, just kind of so organically, it was just a nice way to kind of keep his legacy going. And it just felt the right time. I think it had been about 5 years by that point. And it just, Garth was, everyone, life carries on, doesn't it? Things move on, and everyone else was still out there, bringing new things out. And he had so much left to give, it felt, he was only 54. So he would have been doing some amazing stuff, So it just felt a bit gutting that he wasn't around anymore. So it's just such a nice way to continue his legacy. And obviously, a lot of that work hadn't been seen since it was made 40 odd years ago. So it just kind of sat there in a storage unit. So I think seeing people's reactions when they've seen it again for the first time was just, it just made it all worth it. So.
Because for those who are listening to this who don't know, you put together an exhibition
Yes.
of his work that's been to various conventions and spaces. What's been the reaction?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, so the first one was obviously we just thought that would be it at the panel gallery in Northampton. We thought that would be the only kind of one that happened. So people had traveled, people came from, so Jeff was running it, and he said people that he's been speaking to people, and they've been coming from abroad, from different countries, it was like it's had such a great reception. And then I was on social media on Facebook, and people were messaging me saying, oh, can you bring it here, can you bring it there? And I was like, oh, not not really, not at the time. It was just kind of like a one-off thing. And then I kind of thought, well, this might have some legs to it, because it needs, people seem to want to see it. And we had it's called the Culture Trust in Luton. It's called the Hat Factory, and they're trying to always kind of promote things here and make things bigger in Luton. So I was like, I wonder if they'd be interested. And it's in Hightown, actually, which is where Steve is really quite well known in that area of Luton. So yeah, that went down a treat as well. So yeah, it's had a really brilliant, it's had a really good reception. And yeah, it could really go far, really. I think there's lots of more places that I'd still like to take it. And but it's just, there's not enough really that we could do to honor him. But I think, like, this book is incredible, and just to see all the pages put together nice, like that, it's, and obviously that's just the 2000 AD work. There's other stuff as well, but I mean, yeah, his 2000 AD stuff is just so special, because it's kind of a lot of the older stuff. It's a lot of the, it just feels different, I think. I don't know what it is about a lot of that work, but yeah, I think the people who like 2000 AD, it's so special to them. And I've had people say, I remember exactly where I was when I first saw that piece of artwork. I remember sitting, at the Christmas tree, and all my family were playing games, and they were trying to get me to join in, but I just wouldn't take my hands off the annual, and I read the whole thing from front to back, and that's when I first saw that piece of art. And then they're standing there in front of it in the exhibition, and they're just like mind blown, they're like, wow, I can't believe I'm seeing this for real life. So to be able to give someone that feeling of nostalgia, and to bring them back to that special moment as well, I think that's what it's all about, I think. And yeah, so it's about that, it's about the people, but it's about the fans, but it's also about Steve, and just keeping him, that little bit of him alive still, I think.
So much of this 2000 AD, I mean, he was precociously young when he was drawing, like almost offensively young when he was drawing some of these pages. And it's obviously he'd done stuff like Axel Press Button for Warrior, and various other bits and bobs. But when he gets onto Dredd in 2000 AD, like he's there. Like it's not just technically fantastic. It's also that's Steve. That's the way that Steve draws. Like he came in with just like this incredible style straight off the bat.
I know. It's mad. And there's that story, isn't there, about when he lost the artwork and then he had to redo it all. And that actually the one that he redone was better. They found the original, I think, or something, and then the one that he had done was better
Yeah.
than the one that he spent time on, even though he'd rushed it and done it all in a few days. So yeah, he was very, very blessed. You know, he has such a talent. And that's not to say that he didn't work hard. Obviously he nourished it, and he, you know, chased his dreams at a young age, and he got lucky, I guess. But because I'm sure there's loads of people out there who are amazing, but who don't quite get that break. So he was lucky, but he also worked really, really hard, and he was just very amazingly talented. So
has it been difficult question? Has it been a comfort to the family to see the reaction to things like the exhibition and the Apex?
I think yeah, overall yes, but I think to some it's a little bit easier for me to do it than for, let's say, for my husband. He will come to some exhibitions, but I think sometimes he can find it quite hard as well. Some people get quite emotional, and I think it just depends what day it is, whether or not how he's feeling, whether or not, because I think that's how grief works, isn't it? Some days you're fine with it, and then other days you just, you know, I can't do this today. So yeah, I think the overall reaction to the exhibition and to the book and everything like that is definitely, you know, lovely. I think, but sometimes the talking to people about how much they miss him and stuff can be a bit hard for them. That's why I think you know, I knew him really, really well. He was father to he was grandson to, God, he was father to my grandson. He was granddad to my child. So, you know, he was important, and and I loved him, but I was just that kind of one step removed. So it's a little bit easier, I think, for me than for someone like his mum or his dad or his, you know, his brothers and his own sons. Although I do think 90% of the time they're all fine with it, and I know his mum and dad, they love to talk to people about him as well. But I think everyone has their limits and their days, you know. Whereas for me, I think it's just that little bit easier. So,
had you had any experience of organising exhibitions and things like that?
No, never, never. So yeah, I'd kind of done media and marketing and that kind of stuff as my degree. So when I started kind of promoting these social media pages and stuff, it's kind of what I was kind of doing anyway. But so now I work in marketing, but for a local council. So but yeah, I really enjoy it, and it's just the meeting people, I think, and just the talking to different people and the stories that they tell me about him. And like I said, the nostalgia that it brings people, and that special feeling. And if there's a piece of artwork that people have loved for such a long time and they finally get to see it in person, I think it's really different, because I'm so used to seeing the pages, you know, as organic as they are, as, you know, as they come, whereas all these people have them when I actually see it the other way around, when I see it in a magazine or in a book or in a, you know, comic book or whatever, it's so different to me, because I'm so used to seeing it. Whereas obviously for the 90% of the people, it's the other way around, and they're used to seeing it the other. And then when they see that bit, they're like, wow. So I'm like, oh no, there it is, there in there. And then Dill's like, yeah, okay. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's really lovely to watch people walking around the exhibition and watching their reaction. I think that's really nice. I like doing that.
One of the things that has really struck me reading the Apex edition is how adaptable Steve's style was. So everything from you know, doing Judge Dredd to something like the obvious ones like Judge Dredd to Preacher, but also kind of bits in between. But also, and I was, you know, fantastically fortunate to have met him quite a few times. How much it feels, looking at it now, as an expression of his personality, because there's so much humor, and, you know, seems like an odd thing to say, warmth in his characters, and that's particularly obvious when you're reading something like Preacher, where it's dealing with, you know, it's not just Garth dealing with big issues, it's also Steve dealing with big issues as well.
I think,
Um,
yeah.
you go on.
I was gonna say, I think sometimes in the conversations, and obviously the conversations would be Garth, but just from, yeah, like you say, from the expressions. And I think he would write like LTFC, which is Luton Town Football Club. He would write that in the graffiti on the walls,
Yeah.
and in a couple of things he put like the kids' names. He put Mark or Anthony or Jamie or James, you know, on the in the graffiti and stuff. And it's funny when you flick through things now that I might not have noticed before, and I'm like, oh, you know, that's that personal little touch that obviously I would get that other people might not. And you know, yeah, he does. I think, and he was quite. I mean, anyone who wrote and drew Preacher's obviously a little bit dark and a bit sick. So, which I think they both won't mind me saying. So yeah, lots of. I think his best art came through things. Obviously, him and Garth worked really well together. They were very similar in the way they thought about the world and a lot of the things that they, you know, they agreed on a lot of things. So I think that his artwork was probably better when he kind of loved the storyline, I guess. Yeah, and so.
Is there a favourite piece of yours in the Apex or the exhibition?
Ooh. In the exhibition, in general, I think my whole favourite thing is Hellblazer.
Right, of course.
I don't know what it is. It's just if I get lost there, if I pick up a box to go through with Hellblazer, I'll just find myself sitting there 2 hours later and I'm still reading the pages. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why. I just get like drawn into it. But I don't have like full sets of other things. Whereas Hellblazer, we've got the majority of it, so that might be why. But yeah, with I do like the Emerald Isle, the Judge Joyce ones, because I just think they're really funny. Like isn't it like a spud gun? There's a spud gun and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's really funny. And obviously knowing Garth as well, that makes me laugh. I do quite like those ones. Yeah, I'd say that because I remember growing up as a kid and Judge Dredd being a thing. But obviously I think I watched there was a film when would there have been a film when I was younger?
There was a film in '95.
Yes, so that would have been kind of, I was like 7 then, and I remember that kind of coming out. I don't know, probably shouldn't have watched it, but I feel like maybe a few years later I probably did, and I remember that being like a big thing. So when I met Mark and he was like, "Oh yeah, my dad like has drawn Judge Dredd," I was like, "What? Like that's crazy," and because it just I don't know, I don't. So I think that was always like a when I started going like seeing the artwork and stuff, I was like, wow, because it meant something to me because I knew it a little bit, you know, whereas a lot of the other stuff, haphazard and things like that, I'd never really heard of. So but actually we've got a Rogue Trooper. It's just been taken down actually, but we had it on our walls because we took it to the last exhibition, so I haven't put it back up since. But we have is it Cinnabar?
Yeah.
Rogue Trooper? Yeah, we've had that framed and put up, which is quite nice. So yeah. But I'd say Judge Dredd from 2000 AD, and the Judge Joyce particularly. Yeah,
it's weird looking at Emerald City because that's not a million miles away from when I started reading 2000 AD on a regular basis, and it's so weird looking at it now because it's full of in jokes, not just between Garth and Steve, but also Irish jokes about that you will only know if you've been there or lived there or something like that, and it just for something. There are people who have a negative reaction to it because it is dealing in stereotypes about the Irish, but also it's that cheeky wit that both of them shared, like and spending any time with either or both of them, that's the thing that comes through is this mischievous humor. Always making a joke, even when you're the butt of the joke, Michael.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because talking about kind of commemoration, because they've named is it a street or multiple streets in Luton?
Yes, in Luton. Yeah. So we've got a Preacher Close, a Cassidy Close, and is that it? Yeah, Preacher and Cassidy. I feel like there's one more, but I can't remember what it is, or it could just be Preacher and Cassidy Close. Yeah. So that's quite nice. That was quite a surprise actually. He was someone who used to drink with in the Brickies was the local councillor for that area. And so when he passed away, he was like, oh, you know, we should name it, because obviously he's someone who's come out of Luton that's done quite well for himself. So that was really lovely, actually. Yeah, I wanted it to be like Dillan Drive or something, but no, they went with Preacher Close and Cassidy Close. So yeah,
because it was really nice. But I was at his wake after his funeral, and it was so noticeable, and others have commented on this as well, that you know the pub was packed with comics people who'd come from all over the world to be there, but also there were all the locals who were some of whom were quite kind of confused about where all these people had come from, because for them he was just, you know, Steve. What was his nickname in the pub? I've forgotten. New bloke.
Yeah.
Which he'd been for
about 25 years or something, 30 years. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, to them he was new bloke. Whereas for us it was, you know, it was Steve. It was the Steve Dillon, you know.
Lots of those people that he drank with every single day didn't know what he did. They didn't know what he did. They were so surprised when he died. I think it was in the New York Times. I think at one point it was trending on Twitter. I think it, you know, and they had not a clue. Obviously there was a small amount of people that knew, probably like 5 or 10 people that drink in there, but for years there would have been people that drank with him for years. They said to me, so many people have come to me saying, I drank in there for years. I used to sit at the bar and chat to him, you know, on a lunchtime or whatever, and I had no idea that that's what he did. And you know, so he never spoke about his work. He never, you know, you wouldn't, if you walked past him in the street, you wouldn't, he didn't boast that he's this amazingly talented person or anything. Like, he was so humble. He almost wanted the quiet, simple life. You know, you get the people every now and again who would be like a comics fan, who would hear, or someone would tell him where he drinks, and they would turn up and they would be sitting there, you know, and he would recognize them because he'd be like, oh, who is this? But, you know, he obviously drank there a lot, so he would know that this person doesn't usually come here. And eventually he'd just go over to them and say, do you want me to do you a sketch? And he'd be like, oh my God, yes, please. And they would be like so scared to go and say hello. And my friend used to work, because he got me a job there, actually, at that pub when I turned 18. And then one of my friends used to barmaid there with me. And I think she was there one day when something like this happened, and she was like, Tanya, I just couldn't believe like what was going on. This boy was so nervous. And Steve was just like, he went over at the end and was just like, do you want me to just draw you a sketch? And but we just see him as Steve, you know, we never saw him as anything other than just Steve. And we found it really weird that people would treat him like that, because we were like, what? And I think someone told us that they were, you know, he went to an exhibition and he had like a convention, and he had like bodyguards and things. And that's, for us, that's hilarious. Like, why has he got one? That's ridiculous, you know. And that there were people would tell me that they would queue for like 3 hours or longer, and they still wouldn't get to the front, and they didn't, you know, never got a sketch and stuff, which is awful, really. But yeah, to us that's just craziness, because he was just Steve, and he was dad, and he was granddad, and you know, his work when he was at home, it wasn't a thing, you know what I mean? His work and what he did for his job was not really mentioned ever. That was what he did in his office, and that was that. When he came home, he was just a normal person.
Because I mean, that's in my experience, that's so unusual, you know, because comics is a relatively small world. You know, a vast majority of people get into it because they're a massive fan of comics, and it's a major part of their lives. But it doesn't come as a surprise that it was like that. You know, I remember we were in a pub in New York with him and Garth, and Garth kept kind of prompting him to tell stories about when 2000 AD was owned by Fleetway back in the 80s and everything, and he was quite reluctant to talk about it. Like, you know, it wasn't necessarily something that he massively wanted to get into, because for him that was, you know, that was work, and he was in the pub with his mate, and
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, he definitely did like that kind of separation. And that's, you know, loads of people that I've met, they're like, oh, he was so generous with his time, and at conventions he would do loads of sketches, he would talk to people. And I think he didn't do loads and loads and loads of conventions every year. So when he went, he, you know, he was working and he put in a good shift, and he loved to speak to people and stuff, because when he's not working, he's not working. Do you know what I mean? He's clocked off and he's not thinking about work, and I think, you know, he loved it. Obviously, he loved doing it. There would have been times throughout his career where he probably didn't enjoy it as much, depending on what he was working on. But overall, I say, you know, he did it because he loved it, and he has his own comic collection and stuff. But it wasn't like, if you walked into the house, you know, you wouldn't have known. He didn't have any of his artwork up. He didn't have his own like office or like in the house or anything. He didn't have his trophies up that he'd won. Like, he didn't have anything, any preacher stuff around. Like, you wouldn't have known. You wouldn't have known. Like, they could have easily told me he was, I don't know, a web designer or something, and that's what he did every day, and I wouldn't have known any different. Like, it was just, yeah, it's crazy. Whereas like I see like kind of glimpses of other artists' kind of lives or houses, and it's, you know, they've got their set up with all their artwork and their desk and things like that. And he had, don't worry, he did have all that, but it was actually at an office. He left his house, he went over to an office, he did it, and then, you know, but nowadays I think since COVID people are working at home, but I think he still wouldn't have done that in his house. He liked the kind of separation from work and home, and that was that. But yeah, it was only after he passed away, and then we went into storage and found all these amazing bits that he had, like from the preacher premiere, and bits that he'd been given, and like his comic collection from when he was young, and you know, everything. Like, he still had all those things, it just wasn't on show. So he kept it, obviously, so it meant something to him because he kept it for all these years, but it was just in storage. So it was weird. It's like a different part of his world, and he would talk about it if you asked him, but generally it was like, when he was working, and when he was at home, he was at home.
And in terms of the exhibition, you know, for those people who haven't, I haven't been able to see it myself, but for those who'd like to see it, do you have plans to continue taking it to shows and things like that?
Yes. So we've obviously, this year we only done Enniskillen. We do have another one, but it's not been announced yet, so I don't want to say anything yet. I'm waiting on everything's done and ready. It should be coming out any kind of minute yet, any kind of moment. And then next year I have plans for Glasgow,
right?
And that's good because I've not taken it that far up north yet, so I'll be glad to do that. And where else next year? It's going, well, Luton are starting a new Comic Con. It'll be in their third year next year. This year's their second year, so that's only a day one, and that's obviously really easy for us, so we'll be there. And we are doing, there's another one, I was actually going to a museum next year for 3 months in Stevenage, going to a Stevenage museum from October to December time, so that will be like Hertfordshire based, so that will be there, which would be quite nice. And that will be like a longer one, obviously, like 2 months instead of just a weekend. We don't often do those ones, but I know the person, so we don't like leaving it. Usually we like to stay with it for the weekend. And I know it sounds silly, but yeah, I think it's just knowing that we're kind of always with it, and people are like, oh, it's okay, there's insurance, and it's like, it's not about the insurance, you know, it's not about the insurance, because if something happened to it, if we wanted the money, we'd sell it, do you know what I mean? But it's not, we're not going to sell it. So it's about just, I think, just to leave it for 6 weeks or so is quite hard. So yeah, but yeah, we are, it is going to continue. It's quite hard to do it because I work full time as well, and we have 2 kids, and it's something we do on the side. I say something I do on the side, and I drag someone with me each time. So yeah, it was my poor friend last time. We drove all the way to Enniskillen.
Okay, from Luton.
Yeah, I left the house at 6:30 in the morning. We arrived there at 8 o'clock at night, and then we got up, set up in the morning. We had dinner at like 10 o'clock at night, and then went to bed, set up at like the next morning. Then we went out that night, and then we worked again on Sunday, packed up at 3 o'clock, drove. We got there ferry back we landed in Wales at midnight. Then I drove 5 hours from midnight till 5:30 home, because I wanted to get back for my son's sports day, and it was cancelled because of the rain. So yeah, that was a busy weekend.
Good God, well, that is going above and beyond. You
Yeah.
know, I've driven to like vans full of stock to conventions before, but never over a sea.
Yeah. Yes. No, it was good fun though. I would go back. I thought Ellis Killing was brilliant. Really good.
Hmm.
Really good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Tanya, I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much for chatting about this. It is bittersweet because there was so much more Steve that we were owed by the universe, surely.
I know.
And you know, we just before he passed away, he'd sent a email to our editor saying that he was starting work on the Dredd script that he'd had for a while. So I feel particularly aggrieved.
I know. I think him
Involvedness of that.
and Garth were lined up to do a new Batman as well.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, so that would have, and he's never done Batman, I don't think.
No.
So that would have been, you know, that would have been amazing. So yeah, it does. It feels like there was lots of things left to come. So it is a bit of a shame, but I'm so excited for this book and I can't wait to get my hands on it. And so thank you so much for giving us the, you know, the chance, the opportunity to see all, you know, his 2000 AD work together in one place. And I hope that everyone who has ordered it enjoys it and loves it.
Absolutely wonderful, and thank you for all your help with it as well.
No worries. No, if
wonderful to see.
anything else
See it in
you can do,
existence.
then let me know.
Oh, how wonderful. Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing those thoughts and memories of Steve. If you get the chance to see the art exhibition in the future, and they've just announced that it's going to be at the Thought Bubble Convention in Harrogate in November, which very much looking forward to seeing that. I've seen much of his artwork in the Apex edition. I can see it in the flesh at the show. Yeah, so very much looking forward to that. Next, we have Steve, who is going to talk to David Brothers, who's a writer and an editor and a critic, about Cry the Werewolf, which, as I said, is just one of the best, not just Steve Dillon, but Judge Dredd stories, I feel. And Steve's work on it was just, it's so evocative. The kind of world building, the city building, you know, as he goes from Egg City 1 down into the Undercity. It's just, it's peak Steve Dillon. So if you've not read it, I recommend you check it out in the Judge Dredd case files, excuse me, which are available now. It's also available. I think we did a collection in the States, which was centered around kind of Cry the Werewolf and horror style stories. So yeah, something to look out for. So let's go over. I'm rambling. You can tell I'm rambling. Nobody pipe up, you know. Let's go over to Steve and David as they talk about Judge Dredd, Cry the Werewolf.
Alright, phone outlets, this is Steve. I am back with another one of our 2000 AD deep dives, where each time round we pick a different comics critic, writer, or thinker to talk about something from the 2000 AD archives, something that hasn't been perhaps talked about for a little while, or something that is just on the verge of a comeback. Today, I am joined by one of the smartest people in comics, in fairness, David Brothers, who is a writer, critic, and editor, who is perhaps and a podcaster, perhaps best known for being one of the co-hosts of Manga's Planning. He's also written for sites like Fourth Letter, Comics Alliance, and something called Shelf Dust. And he is also the writer of a new series, which is going to be published later this year from Distillery Comics with Chip Starsky and Marcus Toe. David, hey, how's it going? Thanks for coming on.
Hey, I feel great. Thanks for all the compliments leading right off the top. There's no way this can go poorly.
we like to get you in with a load of compliments at the start, and then it will get more and more vicious as we go along.
Yeah,
and we'll see how it goes by. At the end, we'll be cursing each other, I am sure.
I love it.
But David, which comic from the back catalogue of Fog have you picked to talk about this time?
So I chose Judge Dredd, Cry of the Werewolf. It's credited to TB Grover and Steve Dillon.
Yep,
Hang
that's
on.
right.
And so, very newbie 2000 AD question here. TB Grover's a shared pseudonym, right?
That's right. Yeah, that
How do you
is.
know which person did which story?
No one knows, including the two people who shared the name,
Ah,
according to legend. So TB Grover is John Wagner and Alan Grant, who were co-writing most of their comics for 2000 AD at the time. So
mhm.
the established thinking is that one of them was writing Dredd, one of them was writing Strontium Dog, and any other stories that were under that pseudonym, they don't really know who wrote which one. It was
Yeah,
a way of making sure they could do more comics without feeling like they were overtaking the 2000 AD as a whole. So they didn't want to feel like everything is, oh, it's another John Wagner story. They wanted it to feel a bit, there's a bit more diversity in the content. So
yeah,
uh, they were both sharing the same pseudonym, I think sharing a house together, and they were literally just, who's writing this story today? John, you write it, Alan, you write it, and going back and forth. So it's very much a no one quite knows who did what, but they each did all of it.
yeah. I love that because I chose, excuse me. I chose this one because I wanted something classic 2000 AD. Like I know the modern stuff fairly well. There's a lot of things that I love, and it kind of builds on what was said back in the 70s and 80s.
Mhm.
And getting like a classic Grant or Wagner story, and especially seeing classic Steve Dillon, who I mostly know from the very late 90s on, just seemed like a really fun way to start a conversation, let's say.
Yeah, I
'Cause-
mean, this was published in Prog 322 originally for 5 issues, and I had a quick look at Prog 322, and the other stories in that issue were there was a Rogue Trooper story, there was a Robo Hunter story, there was a Alan Moore and Alan Davis one-off story, um,
nice.
and there was a second Alan Moore story, Skiz, which is his take on ET. So you had double Alan Moore, you had Rogue Trooper, you had Robo Hunter, both in the prime of their runs, and then you had this Judge Dredd story. It was a very strong time to reading 2000 AD, it looks like.
Yeah. And even the art, I'm used to like C. Dillon's an expert in talking heads, like acting, let's say,
Mm,
emotions and that kind of thing. And this is like 90% action and sci-fi landscapes. Like all the buildings are kind of like Mobius-y, for lack of a better phrase, very like that rounded
yeah,
sci-fi, like Eurocomic style.
and there's
It's
quite a
kind
lot.
of a revelation. Yeah.
There's a lot of Mega City One in this one, which is always something I really like seeing.
Hmm.
This is a werewolf story, but it's also a story which goes from the overcity of Mega City One, let's say, to the undercity and then back. And Dylan's really good. He gets the credit, obviously, like say, for doing conversations, expressions, micro expressions, and getting conversations to read in an interesting way. But he's so good at cityscapes as well. He does a really good Mega City One
Hmm.
to me.
There's
Like,
a painted one. Oh, sorry, go for it.
oh no, go for it. You go.
On page 2 of part 2, with the wolf kind of leaping across and getting shot in the back, the Bag Me a Wolfman page, it's great, great lettering. But the cityscape in that one is beautiful. Like it just looks so futuristic and cool. And it
Yeah,
looks like a different Mega City One, a different kind of cool than Mega City One is today. So when I asked for a classic
Mhm.
Dredd, like you really delivered with this one. This is like a whole other world for me.
Mega City One is always at the it's whatever's in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. Every artist, a lot of them will follow what came before, but a lot of them will also just go in their own different direction. And Steve Dillon's one, especially because this is a black and white story, there's no color on it, which I think always helps with these Dredd stories.
Hmm.
It feels really daunting. Like whenever Dredd is in the city there, it is always towering above him and making him look smaller, like a part of the machine. And then when he
Hmm.
goes to the Undercity, he always seems quite big in comparison. He's always got a bit more size on the page. So he comes across as being like the only presence in the Undercity, which is again just like these little subtle touches that Steve Dillon puts in to make sure these characters really feel like they're fitting in a lived-in world.
Yeah. And back at this point, were artists known for their take on Dredd, or were they all kind of chasing the same take on Dredd? Does that make sense? Like, there were people like, I like the Steve Dillon Dredd.
I think by this point there were, particular dreads that people said that is my dread. So Bolland would be the go-to in a lot of
Oh yeah.
yeah. It's weird to think of Bolland and Steve Dillon as being contemporaries because you think of Steve Dillon as being such a modern artist. Even right up until the 2000s, his work was probably the best there was in the industry. Like he was doing Punisher of Becky Cloonan, and it was just as strong as Punisher was decades earlier, and just as strong as his work is here. You can see that his I'm not very good at talking about the different types of dreads because I have a bit of costume blindness and stature blindness. They all kind of like, I know they're different, but they all look a bit similar to me. That I can never tell Spider-Man's apart or the Captain America's apart. And it's a bit the same with Dredd. I always thought with Dillan's Dredd, he doesn't overemphasize anything about him. So he has the strong chin, but it's not like a massive chin that you would see with Bolland or McMahon or any of those artists. He kind of comes across as more of a normal person, I think, is how I'd normally see Dredd.
Absolutely. The cover for Prog 328 is in this reprint. And that's another, like, he just looks like a guy. And I think that enhances the Dredd feeling of he's definitely above the people that he's judging. But like, he's not Superman, like his vulnerability, his humanity is a very big part of this. And I guess we can say the end of this. This story is like 40 years old, basically.
Oh, we can talk about the ending.
I love the story basically ends with him dying and then them being like, but never mind, he's okay now. Like, yes. I like when stories push it to the very limit and then they realize like, actually we kind of got ourselves into a corner here. Let's just back out of it very slowly. And weirdly it fits with Dredd because there's the satirical aspect where like it is a heightened version of reality, like goofy things do happen. Sorry, motorcycle just went past. It's a heightened version of reality where goofy things happen. There's jokes, but it's also serious. And I think doing a werewolf story that gets so serious and then has like in the most complimentary sense of the words, a cop-out ending, like an anti-climax. It's
sure,
his choice. Like, it makes it so much fun for me. Like, it even ends on a pun, like the pretty hairy bit.
That's the most important part of that last part of the story, almost. It's like, how do we get all this story out the way so we can just finish on a pun?
Yeah.
I mean, have you read the classic story, which is the Pat Mills story, which is the return of Rico, Judge Dredd's brother?
I don't think so, no.
It's done inside one prog, as far as I remember correctly. So it's done in like 5 or 6 pages. But this reveals that Judge Dredd has had a clone brother the entire time. That brother was corrupt and went to a penal colony on Titan, then came back to Earth, meets Dredd again, still not like really forgiven him, gets killed, and then on the very last panel, Dredd is carrying him and says, "He's not heavy, he's my brother." And that's within 5 pages. And those are some massive revelations for Dredd.
Yeah.
That was all in service of a pun.
It's great. I don't know, there's something about Dredd that we don't really get in American comics in the same way. Like, we've got comedy, we've got satire, of course, and there's a lot about the satire being an important facet of Dredd. But the way it's executed, I think, is the most interesting part, not just the fact that it's like a satirical cop comic. Like, it's goofy satire. It's not just, like trenchant political thoughts, it's like, no, like, we're doing a werewolf story in our sci-fi tale because there's no reason we shouldn't do a werewolf story in our sci-fi tale.
One of my favorite parts of the story is right at the start where Dredd is he's been on the beat and he's arrested about 300 people in a day. And he said, he gets a message from the authorities saying, all judges, just be aware, there is a full moon tonight, so we need more cops on the beat. And at this point, I don't think they even know werewolves exist. It's just, there's a full moon, just keep an eye out because something could happen.
And it's good comedy. It's so extreme in a certain way. Because doesn't he also just go like, oh yeah, I better get like 17 minutes of sleep so I can be prepared for my all-nighter or my 36-hour shift or something like that.
Yeah, I've just done 3 days in a row of work. I better take 10 minutes of rest and then I will go back out and I will I will sort out this werewolf situation.
Yeah, like that stuff is beautiful to me. It makes these stories so much fun. And I feel like it's carried through to the modern day, but it's a bit easier to see in these older stories when I think the stories might have been more geared towards kids and teens rather than adults.
Sure.
Or maybe I'm the difference, you know. I'm as old as this story, essentially. I was born in November 83. So I'm bringing like an adult perspective to it.
I think it's as well, you know, if you read it at any point in your life, like if you read it as a kid, you're like, this is a fun mad werewolf comic where, you know, Dredd sees a bunch of werewolves and thinks, rather than trying to sneak past them, I'm going to just drive my bike straight into them and see what happens. And then as an adult, you read it and you're seeing all these stories about, you know, the transmission of the werewolf illness, like the fact that you know it's a werewolf story and they don't know it yet, so you're a step ahead of them. So there's different ways of reading it, I think, which is always like one of the strengths of Grant and Wagner is it does, you know, it's aimed at kids, but I think as an adult you can go back and read it and go, this is just as good for me as it was for, you know, the 10-year-olds reading it at the time.
And the good parts are still the good parts. The opening of which part is this? Part 3, where the lady's screaming, you know, my head, blood, and like the zoom out and zoom in at the same time on her character, like drop the background out. Like it's very artistically satisfying, let's say. Like it's just a cool page to look at, like it's well executed. It feels like a horror movie, even just having her like silhouette there for a moment. And then the very next page is the silent or almost silent transformation into a werewolf. You get all the classic werewolfy bits, like the shoulders, the nails. It's just masterful comics work. Like it really sings.
And this is the thing, isn't it, with any werewolf story like this one, because it is a classic werewolf story to start with. It's what you're looking for of a werewolf story is how good is the transformation. You know, ever since American Werewolf, people are just looking like, when are we going to get to that bit? That is like the thing that sells it. If it's good, you know the rest of the story is going to be good. If it don't work, you can go, that story is not one that's going to work. And this one, you know, they just give it to Dillan and go, you know, he's got what, 6 panels to tell the entire transformation, and it looks painful, it looks awkward and supernatural, and then such a big splash of like the arm reaching out, and then the mouth opening as the werewolf like roars straight into the reader's face. Like he's not got much space to work with, and yet he makes it all fit, and it's really effective, I think.
Yeah, and even when it gets to the point where you have the judges turning into werewolves, so you have I feel like inherently comedic wolf head on judge uniform. Like it still feels grounded enough to where you're like, okay, they are kind of in danger. Like it's funny, but not that funny. Or maybe it's like darkly funny is a better way to put it.
Yeah, because when it's happening to the civilians, it's really sort of horrifying and it's drawn like a horror comic. Then when you realize what's happening and it starts happening to the judges, it's kind of like it goes into, there's a bit of farce in it. There's a bit of pantomime. You know, they are still, you know, getting turned into werewolves and they are still dying, but it's not done in the same way anymore. It is more for like, isn't it funny this is happening to them? Isn't it funny that we've gone this far with it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love
sure. You go.
Oh, I was just gonna say I love how much this made me appreciate Steve Dillon. Like I already liked his work a lot. Like Heartland with Garth Ennis from Vertigo in the 90s is one of my favorite books. And it's just, you know, a long conversation and some trips to the bar. And this shows such range, and like there's acting, there's emotional sensitivity, there's really goofy werewolf stuff, there's like roaring monsters, there's the amazing Times Square when they go into the Undercity. It advertises Mad Max 25 and Rocky 37, which we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there.
Get in there.
Another couple 100 years and George Miller will have us down.
I don't doubt him. I don't doubt him for a second. He will get there.
And then you get to the robots, and like it's just such a good sci-fi comic for an artist that, because of how I was introduced to him, I don't think of it as a sci-fi artist, even though, you know, like The Punisher and Wolverine, I would argue, are definitely sci-fi comics because of how they're set. But like they're grounded, you know, they had the pretension of being realistic. Well, this is like we've got robots with faces and they're gonna, you know, get their brains blown out.
And it's such an unnecessary addition to the story, because at that point, Dredd he's gone to the Undercity, which is underneath Mega City 1, which is basically the old, well, it's current New York, is old New York then, which Futurama, I think, later nicked. And he's looking to track down the werewolves, and he could just track down the werewolves, but instead the creative team think, well, no, let's have one werewolf be chained up to a truck, is it?
Yeah,
by,
like a
by a
steam
group of
train or something.
robots. Yeah, by a group of angry robots. So Dredd has to fight the robots, free the werewolf, then follow the werewolf. And it's such an unnecessary addition, but it's so much fun to have that in there.
Because the robots are full on into like classic warfare. They're like, this is our symbol of battle that we're going to lead to take over and show our dominance of the Undercity. And it's like, dude, you guys just found like one werewolf. This is the first werewolf anyone has seen, you know, in 100 years. The fact that everyone knows what a wolfman is, and they're all like, wow, they're, you know, we got to go ahead and kill it or whatever. Also really entertaining. But yeah, the
Dredd
robot
is so
digression is a
unbothered by it.
trick.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dredd is a professional is the other fun part of this. He's sort of like Parker from the Richard Stark novels, where he's the guy who's there to do the job. And like he'll do a pun at the end or whatever. But for the most part, he's like, anything that gets in the way of me and the job is, you know, completely unwelcome, including suspension of disbelief. Like if they say go bag a werewolf, I'm gonna go bag a werewolf.
Yeah, that is what I have to do today. You know, I've
Yeah.
had my 10 minutes of rest. I am now going to go to the Undercity, fight a swarm of werewolves, and then when he gets bitten towards the end as well, which gives that is one of the most iconic 2D panels of all time. Is the cover by Steve Dillon, where he's got his claw and he's I am the law, and he's turning into a werewolf as he's saying it. And his immediate thought is, right, well, I'm dead then, so I'll just sort out as many problems as I can. I will die somewhere quite under the city and no one will remember me, and that'll be it. That is my job. He's so functional at this point. He is such a part of enforcement. He is not, you know, later on he gets a bit more sort of iconic status with himself, so he knows that he's important. But at this point, he's just like, oh, this is my time. I've had a good run and I will die now. The city will have justice.
He's rank and file and he's gonna see it through to the end. That's a really good point. I mentioned the ending was an anticlimax, but in a way, it's not at the same time because we see the links that Dredd will go to. And as part of a serialization, like this particular story might have an anticlimactic ending, but now we know that Dredd is this guy. He is the guy who will put his life on the line without really putting up a fight about it or arguing or having any kind of doubt in his head. And you know, I'm sure that was established before here as well, but this is such a good illustration of it because it's so matter of fact. He's like, oh, job's done, you know.
Yeah. And the fact that, you know, at the end he gets bitten, he gets trapped in a hole by some people in the Undercity. Then he gets rescued by a judge I don't think we've ever seen before. Judge, what's he called? Judge Prager shows up as a retired judge who was just there. He would take the long walk, and he was, you know, which is when judges are retired, they take the long walk into the cursed city to try and bring justice to the outskirts of Big City 1 for as long as they can. And Prager's obviously lived a long time. He's never shown up before. He rescues Dredd, then he vanishes. And I don't think he shows up again for about 20 years.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
He does.
The real-time aspect is so good. Yeah, I like the long walk aspect because I feel like it's almost like if Judge Dredd was Hades, the video game, like this endless series of judges going out into the wilderness to try to solve things.
Yeah.
But this guy showing up weirdly felt appropriate for this story because I knew that judges were in the Undercity, that they'd taken the walk or you know, we're still enforcing the law down there, essentially. So I wasn't surprised, but I did like how he instantly recognized Dredd and then had like chains ready and was like, okay, I'm just going to save the day here and get this done. Like it's definitely Deus Ex Machina, but it's a satisfying one, I think, because I'm like, this guy's cool too.
It's nice to know there are effective judges out there because it's so easy to have, like, you know, the one competent one, and everyone else is kind of there just to ask for help or die. And it's quite good to have another guy just show up. He's professional. He's obviously, you know, he's retired, but he's still got his wits about him. Rescues Dredd, leaves him at the door, and says, oh, I've got some more work to do. See you later. And then just vanishes for 20 years.
And from his perspective, he was just stopping a robbery. Like he didn't see the initial werewolf stuff. He just saw two guys hassling Dredd in this pit.
And again, doesn't bat an eyelid that Dredd is a werewolf. He's like, oh, Judge Dredd's a werewolf now. Okay, well, better just, you know, lock his jaws together so he can't bite me when I take him up to the bosses.
Yeah, I love how direct this is. It reminds me a lot of shonen manga in that way, where
Mm,
things just happen. And if you think too hard about them, yeah, they don't really work. But if you accept them, like if you open your suspension of disbelief, let's say, like they make the comics so much more fun.
yeah,
Like this judge is the sentence's death panel, like instantly great. The perspective is cool, the rounds jumping out of the gun, which I'm not sure what kind of bullets he was supposed to be shooting there, but that's fine.
yeah.
Uh no, just there's yeah, this was which collection is this in? You said best of 2080.
Yeah, there's two options for this one. So you can get it in the Best of 2000 AD Volume 4,
Mm-hmm.
which also has a cover by Dillan, Steve's
Nice.
brother, which is a really nice tribute to him. It's also in the regular Judge Dredd Case Files Volume 7.
Okay.
So that is a run which has 44 volumes around at the moment. So you can see it is fairly early on in the run. It's after Judge Death, it's after Block War, Apocalypse War,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still, very early Dread, really. It's still
Yeah,
formative. So, to have
that's great.
something like this so early on, it's just interesting to see how much they're willing to try at this point. Let's have werewolves. Okay, why not?
And I think at this point, Judge Dredd would have been the kind of thing that like you can't screw up because then you're messing with the money. Like
Mm,
try creative stories, but don't break the character, maybe might have been the order of the day. And they're still like really swinging for the fences, like you're saying. Like they are trying really cool things.
yeah,
I've mostly like I know modern stuff fairly well, and I mostly skipped around with older Dread, like just buying the classic editions like as I see them rather than in any particular order.
mm,
So jumping back and forth is always a treat, like the juxtaposition between the two and trying to find out the what's shared between modern Dread and classic Dread, the different themes or even like design, storytelling, things like that. Like having a magazine with such a long history, I think is like a gold mine for a comics critic because there's just so much to like focus on
yeah.
and think too much about.
This is why I think it's always like when people say, "Shall I start at Dread with Volume 1?" I think the best thing with Dread is to start at the genre you like. It's a bit like, a bit like a
Yeah,
Batman character where you can put him in a horror film, you can put him in a psychological drama, put him in a political thriller, or put him in a big action movie. And depending on what kind of thing you like, read that Dread first and try that. If you like werewolf stories, this could easily be your first Dread, and you get the character, you know what he's about, and then you can read something else afterwards.
absolutely. I think it would have been something like Trifecta, something in that realm, like the low life sort of side of Dread that
Hmm.
clinched the character for me. And then I expanded out from there, kind of once I had a good understanding of what he was like in my head for me, you know.
But to go
Um,
behind the scenes a little bit, that is exactly
yeah,
how I did it because you got me into Dread.
yeah,
The one who said, Steve, try reading Low Life. That's what I read. Then I got into Dread, and then years later, Jordan Rebellion. So you're the one who found the way in to Dread for me.
see, that's great. And all it is for me is just reading a comic and telling a friend about it because there's always something, I don't know, like we use cool to describe so many different things, but I think there's a real value to things being cool, to seeing cool things, to looking at something cool every day. There's like a mental health benefit, let's say.
Hmm.
And there's so much of comics that I think is cool. Even just if you pick any random page of Cry of the Werewolf, I can tell you something interesting about it or something I
Yeah,
find interesting about it. Because there are so many different ways I've found to appreciate comics. And sometimes it's as good as like, look, Judge Dredd with the werewolf head is really funny.
yeah.
It's I don't know, it's beautiful. I love comic books so much, and it's great when you hit books like this where it's like, oh, this is what I want to like talk to people about. I want to share with people. I want to force my friends to talk to me about it, let's say.
Hmm. That is as good a point as any, I think, to finish discussing Cry of the Werewolf. But David, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about it. Like I say, um, your interest in comics has become my interest in comics. Anytime you say this is something to read, that is something I have to put on my reading list because you're so you're so often you found the exact thing that is the coolest thing to read. So it's great to have you on. Can I ask where can people find you online? What are you working on, and what are your projects?
Yeah. So you can find me online at iamdavidbrothers.com, spelled exactly how it sounds. That has all my links and things like that. I try to do essays about comics, video games, little YouTube videos, just talking about things that I like, to the entire internet as best I can. I co-wrote a book coming up called Time Waits with Chip Zdarsky and Marcus Toe, coming out from Distillery. It's sort of a you thought you got out of the life, but now the life is reaching back to pull you back into it kind of tale. Very classic action movie crime kind of thing. I edited Emma Rios's new graphic novel Anzuelo, which is coming out very soon. So definitely look out for that. It's post-apocalyptic and very emotional, very tender, and that's all I'll say. I won't spoil anything on her behalf. But yeah, that'll get you started down the road of David Brothers completionism. And I write about comics every now and again on Shelf Dust, which is a little website that some people may have heard of.
Who knows? Who knows? David, brilliant to have you on the thrillcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Super stuff. Well, thank you to Steve and to David. That was an absolutely fascinating chat. Loved every second of it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, Earthlets. Another small tribute to Steve Dillon. We did an episode a while back, when he passed away in 2016, where some of the people who knew him talked effusively and emotionally about what a great guy he was. So we shall see you in 2 weeks' time. I'm off to collapse into bed. And we're hopefully, technology permitting, we're going to bring you not just news and interviews about what's coming up from 2000 AD, but also the San Diego panels, which we recorded and now have to go through with a fine-tooth comb. So look forward to that. See you in a fortnight, Earthlets. Please take care of yourselves. And until then, Splundig Verthrig.